Thanks a lot for coming on the show. I'll actually tell you why I wanted to talk to you. So I'm relatively new to classical music. I've always kind of appreciated it, and like I come from a heavy metal background, and a lot of heavy metal music, they draw inspiration from that kind of symphonic orchestral sound. And then a couple years ago, just kind of out of nowhere, I went to see the performance of Beethoven's Violin Concerto that you were conducting.
Yeah.
And when I was in the theater, when I was in the Imperial Theater, the feeling of the music was so overwhelming. Like, I'd listened to classical music, but being in that room with all the music hitting me, like, it was so overwhelming that I like, in a good way, I almost kind of had a panic attack. It was so powerful. And it just kind of changed the way I felt about it. And so I was kind of curious about how the feeling of it, classical music versus the sound that you hear, recorded. I'm just kind of wondering how you balance those two things, or how they play into each other.
Well, when you listen to classical music on a CD or any type of music, you don't have the human aspect of the experience because it's recorded. You're not in the presence of other concert goers also appreciating the moment. There's kind of an energy, a synergy that happens in a concert hall between the people. You can kind of feel the attention bubble. People really, paying attention to what's going on, but also the energy coming from the stage. And live sound, now I'm not a sound engineer, so maybe it would be something to verify, but I find, at least for myself, conducting from the podium, sound is physical. When you get very loud moments, you feel it going through your body, the waves of sound. I don't know how far it would reach in the audience, but yeah, I think when you go to live music, there's definitely a human connection aspect to the experience, and there's an energy. And from the stage, we also feel the energy of the audience, and it helps us in our performance. Even if I'm facing the orchestra, I'm not facing the audience, I can feel the audience behind me. And so I think it's part of the whole live experience. That's why I'm always so enthusiastic at inviting people to concert and, giving it a try. It's not about knowing what you're going to experience, because if you've never been, you don't know, but try something new. And why not classical music?
I completely agree. And it was fascinating. Like, when everyone's playing in sync, it just sounds like one giant force. Like, bands, a 4-piece band, like a rock band, it's the same. I mean, it just is a different experience, like you said. And I'm curious, like, when you have even though you're back to the audience, you can kind of feel the energy that the audience is putting towards the stage. That's really interesting to me.
Yeah, you can feel the kind of, I don't know how to explain it, but yeah, the vibe in the hall, how attentive people are, and even there's a silence in between movements. And it's another musician who made me realize that, and now I cannot not notice it. But silence in between the movement and before you start a piece, and after the last note, the moment before people clap, silence is magical. It's filled with the energy of the people. It's filled with the attention, with the emotion.
Yeah. And the silence between movements, again, coming from like a regular rock and roll background, the silence between movements where there's no applause and it's just silent, like, it is kind of shocking in a really good way. You really are kind of like anxious, and it's like you're digesting everything you just took in. It's really fascinating. Yeah,
it's emotionally charged, and sometimes people will clap in between movements, and for me, I want people to have a good experience. So if they feel like clapping because they're enthusiastic and they're reacting after they heard something they like, I'm fine with this. And sometimes the audience doesn't clap, and I'm also okay with this.
Okay.
And yeah, I mean, I'm happy if people are happy and they express their joy in the moment. But there's also something special when they wait until the end, because then there's like attention sustained. So both experiences are good, you know, and you don't know in advance how the audience will react.
Is that kind of an old tradition where you didn't clap between movements? You waited for the whole piece to finish, or is that like? I feel like classical music has all these like rules that are attached to it that people think there's all these rules, and it kind of just makes people think it's strange or something like that. I don't know.
Yeah, you know, I don't know the historical facts about clapping in between movements or not clapping. I wish I could be more historically informed about it, but I get your point about, you know, people having this idea that it's a strict structure, or like you need to observe certain behaviors. And I mean, you know, of course, you listen when the music is being played, but I think more and more there's more freedom. Like, as I said, I'm not gonna be angry if people clap in between movements or if they don't clap. You know, for me, it's like, oh, well, this was tonight's experience. People felt ecstatic and they expressed it. So, and sometimes even for the same symphony, in one city, we're going to have people clapping in between, and then the next day we play somewhere else and it's silent, and, you know, it's interchangeable. You can't foresee it, but, you know, it is what it is, and it's part of the live experience of a concert, and as a musician, I welcome it.
And so if when you're feeling the feeling the audience is putting towards you, do you adjust the show based on that, on the feedback, or do you kind of stick to the plan?
Well, you know, you can't plan emotion, but there's an artist I really admire, and what's not Martha Argerich now? She's a pianist. That's not the one. Marina Abramovich. Sorry, and she's a performance artist, and she's talking about the importance of being present when you perform. And what she does is not music; she does performance art, but to me, it really resonated with me because it works for musicians as well. And she said, be present in every instant, and not only be present, be sincere in your artistic intention or emotion. So you, as a musician, I am connected to the music. I am being present in what I do. And, you know, sometimes you will hear people say, oh, you know, that artist has got a great presence, or, you know, you feel their energy coming from the stage. So it's not that I plan, you know, on doing something in particular. My only plan, once everything has been rehearsed, is to enjoy the moment, enjoy the sharing aspect of the moment, and be present. And I think that is the best way of communicating and touching the audience in an emotional way. And
can the members of the orchestra feel your presence as well? Can they kind of tell when you, the conductor, are in the moment and just kind of riding the wave?
Yes, and I can tell when they are also in the music, because we communicate in so many different ways. Of course, there's like the technical aspect of the gesture. There's certain things that have to be clear in the vocabulary I use with my hands and arms. I communicate a lot with my face, with my eyes, with the way I'm breathing. I breathe into the music. When I start a phrase, I breathe before the musicians come in, and we get into kind of a state of flow where there's really a chemistry or a communication that happens that is, it's hard to explain. It's not, because it's not palpable, but we kind of get in that flow, and then things work, and we can easily anticipate each other's entrance. We are more attentive. Our ears are open. Our hearts are open too. Like we're receptive emotionally, and we invest in the music. At the same time, we receive from each other and from the music. It's hard to explain. It really is kind of a communication that happens when we're all present and focused and, again, sincere in what we do, and we love what we do. So, and I think this is something the audience can perceive if we're having fun on stage.
I agree. From my experience seeing other genres of music, you can tell when an artist is kind of going through the motions or whether they're actually involved in loving what they're doing.
Yeah.
And you have a background in visual performance, don't you? You studied theater and ballet before you got into music?
Yeah, well, I always had music lessons. I started violin when I was 9, and I was studying at the McGill Conservatory at the time. Now, sadly, it doesn't exist anymore, but it goes up to the level before university. And so I was doing my exams every level until university, but I was doing this on the side. So in Quebec, in the education system, we have 6 years of elementary school, 5 years of high school, and then 2 years of cégep. And then we have university. And usually, cégep is when you can start specializing, or at least exploring a field you think you want to specialize in before actually committing to it and, getting into a university program. And when I did cégep, I did not do it in music, but I did do my violin exam at the cégep level at the conservatory, but I did not do all the other classes around it, like the theory, orchestration, counterpoint, ear training. So I was at the good level on my instrument, and I was missing a lot on the side. So, but I was interested in so many artistic endeavors that it was hard for me to choose. And I loved theater, and I loved visual arts. And I did that program, Arts and Letters. And you have to choose a major and a minor artistic profile. And my major profile was visual arts, and my minor profile was theater. But that takes a lot of your time. And then I could not practice my violin as much as I wanted to. And it created a void that helped me understand that I could probably, appreciate visual art and theater on the other side, not as an artist, but as an audience member. But music was really my path. And I knew I wanted to do something on the stage. I wanted to be a performer. And so I took 1 year after cégep to try to catch up on all the other courses with a private teacher. And then, I got into university, and then I got interested in other projects. I like working with the team. I have a very creative mind. I like building projects from scratch. I kind of have an entrepreneurial mind as well as an artistic mind. And I started thinking and realized, well, maybe conducting is even closer to what would allow me to express every facet of my personality. while still being a musician. And then I transitioned to conducting. So that's kind of like my path in a nutshell.
That's really interesting because I mean, I could see how the background in theater and visual arts would roll into conducting because you're not playing an instrument per se, but at the same time, you're kind of playing every instrument, right? You're kind of like, and you really have to emote your own feelings into the orchestra.
Yeah, and I have to say that I remain an active audience member. I go see theater, museum. I don't have a lot of time when I'm performing. My calendar is pretty full. I also love dance, and you're right. I did ballet, and I also did ballroom dancing competitions.
Oh, cool.
And all of these things, I think they fed my reflection and my artistic vision. Like it feeds me artistically to witness and absorb what is going on in these other connected fields. And I feel that certainly having done dance before really helped me understand my body in space. And I think it gave me an understanding of my gesture, a better understanding. I don't know. I see it as something very positive because I'm precise with my gesture. That's the conducting technique. But to move your body in space expressively came more naturally, I think, in the posture because I had a dance background.
Okay.
It certainly contributed to my technique, I think.
Well, I would imagine someone like yourself, who's obviously well versed in classical music, like you could. So one thing is like people make the mistake that it's the same songs being played over and over by the same or by different orchestras, but the conductor would obviously change everything, right? You can probably feel when a conductor is maybe a little static or rigid versus a conductor is free flowing a little bit. Like that must change significantly.
Yes, you can have the exact same symphony played by the exact same orchestra, but with a different conductor, and you will have a different sound. It will have a different vibe, a different energy, and also because when we have our own personality, we can't detach ourselves from ourselves. And if you approach your art again with sincerity, who you are will transpire. I mean, it's a good thing. But not only that, we have our personal style and personality, but also in rehearsal, depending on what aspects of the music we focus on. When we rehearse, we decompose the work a little bit and then we put it back together. And the idea is to have a unified approach to the work in performance. And it really is a team effort. I always have a vision of what I want for the work. But sometimes, the orchestra comes to the rehearsal, and I always listen first when we do a first run of the piece. And sometimes it's different than what I would have had envisioned, but I like it. And so I leave it because, I find the orchestra also sounds best sometimes when you let them play naturally because they also have their personality. So, it's a give and take, but all of this to say that in rehearsal, conductors will focus on different aspects. Some may take a faster tempo, which is going to change a little bit the mood and the momentum of the music. Let's say short notes. Some conductors want them maybe a little drier. Some conductors will want smaller phrases. Others will choose to do longer gestures in different passages. Even sometimes in the texture and the accompaniment, in the melody and counter melody, they might ask different balance of instruments. So all these decisions are going to affect the final outcome and how it sounds.
Okay.
So even if it's the same work, and even same orchestra, same conductor, if you were to come in each city it would sound slightly different each time, which is fascinating to me.
Yeah, well, it kind of adds a little bit of the organic to it, keeps things fresh and different. You mentioned a couple things about dynamics and tempo. I was kind of curious, like, do members of the orchestra ever suggest tempo and dynamics, or is that purely the role of the conductor who makes that decision and controls those aspects of it?
Yeah, it's mostly artistic decisions made by the conductor. Sometimes they would want to try a passage, especially, let's say it's a fast passage and it's challenging to play. As I said, rehearsals are a team effort, and sometimes they will ask, can we try a little bit slower before we build it up to tempo? Okay. And, again, from the conductor, the approach is not my vision or else, I guess, because the ultimate goal is to have a unified performance and the best sounding performance. And sometimes you have an idea of the tempo, and in your head, it's perfect, it's going to work well, but then you come to rehearsal and you feel that the music speaks better at a slightly slower tempo, a slightly faster tempo. So nothing is rigid. Mm-hmm. When I say I make decisions ahead of time about the different musical parameter, well, I make these decisions, but always knowing that I will adapt certain things. Mm-hmm. So it's not a frozen frame.
It's kind of like a foundation, but then there's room for interpretation.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a process. It evolves. Yeah.
So one thing, this is going to be pretty nitpicky, but one thing I do some recording at home and I play electric bass guitar, and I'll notice a timbre difference. Like if I'm playing the A on the E string, so it's like the fifth fret, or if I'm ringing open the A string, same note, but the tone and feeling can be different. Mm-hmm. So does it get that micro for you? Like, let's say there's 2 or 3 cellos, are they choosing where to play that note? Or do you know what I mean? Does it get that micro technical?
It can, because it's the same on string instruments, both instruments. You can play the same note, let's say I'm a violinist, I'm going to speak violin strings. So you can play an A on the E string, which is going to have a more brilliant sound. But if you play the same note up on the fingerboard on the A string, it's going to have a much more mellow voice. And most of the time, they will all have similar fingerings. But if you decide you want that particular color that you get if it's played on the A string, then you can ask them to play it on the A string. But they all have to do the same fingering if you want to have that effect, because if one of them plays on the E string, it's going to stick out. So for certain things like that, yes, if I want to explore a slightly different color, I will ask them to maybe play higher on the other string to get that more, I don't know, in French I would say feutré, but it's a little more muffled. It's a little less brilliant and piercing. Mm-hmm.
Okay, that makes sense, because that string would be thicker, right? Mm-hmm. Okay.
And you're higher. Mm-hmm. You're higher on the string, so there's more tension. Mm-hmm. But it's also, a bigger string, so it's not going to be as piercing. Okay.
So does that mean you as a conductor have to be familiar with all the instruments in the orchestra?
It's a good idea to be as familiar as you can with the instruments in the orchestra. As I said, I'm a former violinist, so of course that's very useful, because the strings are a very big section of the orchestra. But as part of my training, I did my undergrad in music theory, and then my master's and doctorate in conducting. under the guidance of the conducting teacher, who said, I recommend you do music theory because it's going to help you in your rehearsal if you understand how music is written. And as part of that training, that degree, I had orchestration courses. So I had to learn about the particularity of all of the instruments, even if I don't play all of the instruments myself. Because when you let's say you have a piano part and you want to translate it for full orchestra, and so it's like painting. Each instrument is a color, and so if you combine instruments, you combine colors. So you have to be familiar with the timbres of the different instruments, and also there's technical particularities. There's things that will be much more comfortable at the clarinet than they would be on an oboe, or just because the way the instrument is built. And so knowing this is really useful in rehearsal because, for instance, in the low register or the oboe, it's more difficult to play very, very, very soft.
Okay.
And so let's say I'm trying to let's say there's a chord and it's all the woodwinds and the oboe plays a note in the chord, but in the lower register, well, there's a limit to how soft I can bring down the ensemble without having the oboe stick out. And then you can't ask for more because that's how the instrument reacts. That's how it produces the sound. It's difficult to play very, very soft in the low register.
Okay.
For the flute, let's say I want more flute and she's in the mid-range register. This is not a register that will project a lot for the flute.
Okay.
So what are my options? I'm going to say, okay, so I understand you're in that mid-range register. Can you please give as much as you can? But then I will also ask the rest of the orchestra to lower their dynamic so I can hear the flute better if that's what I want. So knowing things like that really, really helps in rehearsals.
Okay, that's interesting because I think a lot of people who aren't familiar with the music, that kind of music, would assume that all the instructions are already there in front of you, the conductor, and they wouldn't understand that you would be making these changes. Like they just assume it's like a strict set of instructions and you're just relaying it to the musicians, to the point where I've even heard, some friends would be like, why is there a conductor even there if they're playing the same song over and over?
Yeah. Well, I mean, everything is in the score. It will be written, let's say, pianissimo in the oboe part, but pianissimo in the lower register it's a pianissimo in the context of the particularities of this instrument.
Okay.
And so if you want to balance things out around that pianissimo, you'll have to, dynamics are not absolute. Depending on the context.
Yeah.
You have to produce that dynamic in the right context. Soft is only soft in relation to the other dynamic after or the other dynamic before. And there's certain things in orchestration that will allow you to have very, very soft pianissimo. And then at some other moment, your pianissimo is going to be a little bit louder because it's influenced by the instruments that are playing. So dynamics are there to tell you it needs to be soft, for instance, but you have to interpret them in the context. It's not like on the volume on the radio saying, okay, well, pianissimo is between the radial 3 and 5. It's not absolute like that. And there's a lot of repertoire for symphony orchestra. I can understand that classical music can sound similar, and certainly if you stay with one composer, it's going to sound similar, even if the works are different. But there's also an acoustical. So yeah, to your point, in rehearsal, the conductor plays a role of you lead the rehearsal. Because when we play it once, then okay, well, you have 2.5 hours. So what do you do with that time? Someone needs to manage the time.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
and like, but I mean, not only that, I don't want to reduce my role to only that, but there's also an acoustical aspect. The way sound travels in a hall, and it's different in every hall. But if you're sitting more at the front or at the back of the orchestra, you're not going to hear things exactly the same way. And sometimes there's situation where musicians sitting at the back of the orchestra, they have to go with my baton, because if they go with what they hear, it's not going to be together. Because by the time the sound travels back,
yes, okay,
it's too late. So there's also that aspect where a conductor is useful.
Okay. Wow.
I mean, there's many aspects, but
that's really interesting. I hadn't thought about that because the sound's projecting out, and then the musicians are hearing it back after it hits the room and comes back. A lot of it.
Yeah, and sometimes depending where you're sitting in the orchestra, the way the sound bounces back to you is going to be different. So and then let's say you have 60 people. So how do you make it happen? How do you start a piece with everybody coming in together on the downbeat? So definitely there's and then it's music interpretation. Like the term it really is interpretation. Sometimes there's different approaches to the same passage. And so there's a good reason to agree on one way of approaching the work. And that's also the role of the conductor. But it goes beyond that if you want to talk about leadership, because it goes beyond the music for me. There's a big human aspect to leadership, and it's really important to participate in creating a positive environment to work, because you hear it when we said earlier, you hear it when the audience can feel we enjoy what we do and we're having fun making music together. But that also comes from appreciating one another. And I appreciate and admire their talent, and it's really important. People are going to give their best if they feel good and if they're having fun and they're feeling the working process is positive, and it's everybody wants to play well and give a good performance. It's rewarding, and it's we're also perfectionists. We want to achieve what we know we can achieve. So there's also that aspect of leadership, of creating this your part by who you are and how you work and what you project, your demeanor, your presence, it all participates in creating that chemistry and that communication.
And it kind of comes back to what you were talking about earlier with flow, because if everyone's in a good mindset and they're enjoying themselves, there's less to think about. So you have a better opportunity to be in that flow state where you're just experiencing the moment.
Yeah, exactly. So, I feel like what's the expression? I sound like I'm preaching for my own choir by saying conductors are useful. But I think it's interesting that we discuss the subject, because it is kind of an unknown profession.
Well, I think a lot of people could relate in the way that maybe they're working, day jobs, whether it be at a store or a factory, and everyone's had a manager or a boss who has made the situation stressful or has made strange decisions that leaves a voice in your head wondering why the person is doing this.
Yeah.
And then they've also had bosses who just allow them to be who they are, and they go about their job and they do their job well, and they get praise when they do their job well. So I think a lot of people can relate to that experience.
Yeah, absolutely. It's absolutely the same as in any working environment, like the relationship between a leadership position. Some people are positive, supportive leaders, respectful and
Hmm.
appreciative also of the other people on the team, and some others maybe not as much.
Yeah, I think it's a common experience, and
Yeah,
you remember the ones who make you feel good, and
yeah,
the negative ones you either forget about or you don't have anything good to good to say
yeah,
about. Yeah,
yeah, yeah,
yeah, that's really interesting. So
yeah.
does it come down to so as a leader, often people talk about kind of community, like building a community too. So do you take that into account when you're, because I know you've been in various orchestras and you've played in various locations. So how do you view community in terms of all that?
Yeah, I think it's very important because an arts organization is rooted in its community, and different communities and different audiences um, will have different tastes in music and arts, different habits, different societal issues they're interested in that are particular to where you're at. So I think it's very important to be aware and learn about these things. And when I first arrived in New Brunswick, I asked, the people I was working with, because I'm not from New Brunswick. I
Hmm.
grew up in Valleyfield, a suburb about 50 minutes southwest of Montreal. And Valleyfield, its own community, and it's different from St. John and Moncton and Fredericton and any other place in New Brunswick. So I was interested to know, what's um, how can I find a way to nurture a positive sense and like a positive aspect in the community while still be able to develop an artistic vision for the orchestra.
Hmm.
And I try in what I propose in the programs, because that's another of my responsibilities is choosing the music. Is I want the orchestra to be welcoming for everyone.
Hmm.
I want people who never came to a classical music concert to be able to pick one in the season and try it out. I also want different voices to be heard and represented in the programs. So it's a balancing act to include all of this in the program, but also in terms of playing a greater role in the community is through our partnerships. We can leverage other organizations, bring awareness to certain subject. We play a role also in education. When we have our string quartet who goes to the schools to play, when we invite Systema musicians to our concert for free, so they have this concert experience. And so there's many ways the orchestra can be involved in the community.
Hmm.
And there's a project, I can say what it is right now. It's not going to be for next season, but it's in the works for 2 seasons with an organization that does community work in St. John and in the province. And I'm really looking forward to building that project because it's a subject that is dear to my heart.
Okay.
And that's why I also wanted to partner with that organization. So, yeah, all these different ways where the community is important. And, I said the importance of the sharing aspect of music. If there's no community, if there's no audience,
Hmm.
there's no music.
Yep.
So the community is 50% of an orchestra.
Yeah. So it's quite important.
Very
Very
important,
important. Yeah.
And I'm very grateful to do what I do. You know, I feel it's a privilege, it's a responsibility, and it's a privilege, and it really touches my heart when I meet people after the audience and they're happy, and they told me they tell me they enjoyed the concert, and I'm like, well, you know, you never know what people go through in their lives, and then, you know, for that moment they had a positive experience, and I find it very touching if I can bring something positive in people's life through doing what I love.
Yeah, music's beautiful that way because it can take people out of what, even if they're having a really difficult moment in their life, when they're in the room and the music's happening, the audience can experience that flow state too. They can kind of let go of everything and just be with themselves or with their friends in the moment.
Yeah.
And it's interesting you mentioned responsibility, because I think that's another thing a lot of people who aren't performers or aren't in a position such as yours, they wouldn't necessarily view it as a responsibility. They would view it more as like a performance and a privilege and a job maybe, but I don't know if they would understand the responsibility aspect of it.
Yeah, well, because, you know, having the opportunity to develop an artistic vision and making artistic suggestions and choices, it is a responsibility, because your choices, you know, if you choose something, it always means you're not choosing something else. And, you know, that's why I said it's a balancing act, and sometimes I have to balance things out over 2 seasons, because I can't do everything I would like to do in one season. But yeah, I'm always very aware of that, and sometimes I'm hesitating between 2 living composers, or you know, should I invite an emerging artist or a seasoned professional? Like, both are important, both bring something to a program, and, you know, during a season. So yeah, I do see it as a responsibility, because I have to make sure in my choices that it's balanced. And as I said, you know, that I make choices that allow the most people to be involved, that will resonate with the majority of people, that will allow different voices to be heard. So I do think about that a lot. And sometimes I wish I could do more. I wish I could have 20 programs a year, you know?
Yeah.
But yeah.
Yeah, so that is, I mean, that is just knowing that you have to choose from such a vast collection of pieces, right? Yeah, that alone is a big responsibility. And I think people maybe assume they're the same pieces from hundreds of years ago, but you mentioned contemporary or living composers.
Yeah.
So obviously there's contemporary music that's still being arranged and written.
Yeah, there's still composers writing symphonies. And last season we played the Symphony #1 by a Canadian composer named Heather Schmidt. Okay. And we played a full 40 minutes symphony, and the audience really enjoyed it. Cool. And I was really happy about that, because, you know, you never know when you propose something different if it will be well received. And it's a little bit like risk management in a way also, because, of course, if you program something beloved by the audience, you know that they will be there. But then if you propose something different that you know they have never heard, are they going to be on board with you? Are they going to want to be curious and discover that new composer? But for me, it's really important to introduce these living composers' work to the audience, and to include them in our programs, because yes, there are a lot of living composers, and it's a tough market, because we play a lot of the music from dead composers. Back in the day, let's say Beethoven's time, well, they were playing the music of the composers living at that time. Beethoven was alive when his music was being played.
Mm-hmm.
And so, but I also understand that there's been kind of a big shift in aesthetics in the 20th century and 21st century. But the beauty of it, I find, is that, yes, there is some music that's very intellectual and rigorous, and it's difficult to approach it because it's so far removed from our regular auditive reflexes or what we know.
Mm-hmm.
So we feel lost in it, and that's one of the downside of music versus modern visual art, for instance, because visual art, you can stay for as long as you want in front of the painting.
Mm-hmm.
But music, it's instant by instant. So you don't have time to absorb everything. And when something is new, your brain is bombarded with information.
Mm-hmm.
And if the information is set in a structure that's not the same structure your brain is used to processing music in, it's destabilizing. It's even like myself, when I do a lot of contemporary music, and sometimes it takes a couple of times listening to it to really appreciate it and understand what's going on. But the beauty of the 20th, 21st century music is more than ever today, there's a coexistence of a plurality of different aesthetics. So that's something important also I want the audience to know, is because they did not like one living composer's music does not mean that they will not like all of modern music, because there's so much variety from living composers.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think a lot of people could relate to that too, in the sense of anyone who's listening who's just used to listening to hip hop or rock and roll. Like, you don't have to like every single band in that genre of music, and just because you hear one hip hop artist you don't enjoy doesn't mean that all hip hop is not for you.
Yeah.
Just as an example,
Yeah, no, it's a very good analogy. Exactly.
So, maybe I could ask you a couple technical questions if you don't mind.
Yeah, go ahead.
I'm kind of curious about it's the baton, right? It's called a conductor's baton.
Yeah.
How do you choose your baton? Baton, is it like based on weight, or I guess I'll let you answer, but
yeah, it's like Harry Potter. It chooses you.
it chooses.
No, but I think it's a matter of comfort.
Okay.
Some batons are shorter, some are longer. Mine is kind of on the shorter side. I don't like the very long ones. I find them, I don't know, it's too clumsy for me, my personal taste. But also there's the weight of the handle and the material. My personal handle is made of wood, and usually professional conducting batons are balanced. So where you would close your fingers is where the baton would balance itself if you were to put it parallel to the floor on one finger.
Oh, okay.
So it's balanced.
Interesting.
But for me, the question of comfort was important in ergonomy. So my handle is a little bit like a pear, but it's a big pear, because with the bigger handle, I don't have to close my fingers as tight around it.
Okay.
And so I feel that my hand is more relaxed. And if my hand is more relaxed, my wrist is more free to move, and it creates less tension in my forearm.
Okay.
So that's how I chose my baton. It's like what works with my body and what allows me to be efficient without developing tensions.
Okay. Because if you called it a pear, the smaller.
Yeah, well, it's like I don't know how to call it, like the pommel. I don't know. It's like you have the baton, and then you have the end of it, the handle, or mine has the shape of a pear. It's made of wood, and it's on the bigger side. So this way I don't have to close my hand so tightly around it.
Okay, yeah, of course, because of fear of dropping it or something, right? Like if it's easier to hang on to when it's bigger, when it's a larger.
Well, it's just that if your hand is not closed as tight, Oh.
Sorry, it just cut out there for a second.
Yeah, I apologize. I had a call coming.
Oh yeah, no problem. Yeah. Okay, that's maybe too. Okay, so that's interesting. The baton being balanced, I find that interesting. Just something I would never think about. So does that mean each hand has a different responsibility? Is each?
Yes.
And are most conductors using, like, is it a right-handed type of thing, or is it like the way some people are left-handed, some people are right-handed?
Well, I'd say even left-handed conductors would use their right hand for the baton. I've never seen the conductor use the left hand. Maybe it exists, but I'm not aware. So yeah, both hands have communicate different informations, and sometimes we'll use both our hands for the same information. But the right hand is where you give the tempo. And you can give articulation also, because if you give a very dry beat, you will get shorter notes. And then if you give a more legato, like more tied kind of softer gesture, you'll get a more sustained sound, more legato, the size of your gesture as well. Or the intensity, because sometimes you can beat very small but very intense if it's a loud dynamic. If you have accents, usually in soft dynamics you will use a smaller beat. If it's a very loud passage, you can have a bigger gesture of the beat. Left hand is kind of the expression hand, even though you can't use a neutral beat and then just be expressive in the other hand. But what I mean by that is that with the left hand, you can show the phrase, you can sustain the phrase with your hand and show where it goes. You can show crescendo by raising your hand. The crescendo, you lower your hand. You also use your left hand to give cues to musicians for their entrance. Well, for me, there's two types of cues. The cues where I know a musician has been counting many bars of rest, and I look at them when they need to come in. Okay. I know they're counting, but it's just, connecting before they come in. And or cues because I want to invite a musician. Let's say I want to hear that part a little bit louder. I will use my left hand to, invite them to play louder. So yeah, that's in a nutshell.
Yeah.
The use of the two hands.
Okay, that's really interesting. And so again, like the kind of inviting people to play louder, that comes into how not every performance is different. You're in the moment and controlling the moment. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
That's really
or it can be softer also. Sometimes I would, if the accompaniment is I'm doing a concerto and the accompaniment is a little too loud, let's say we're in a different hall, the acoustic is a little bit different and the sound is not reacting the same way in the hall, and then I feel the accompaniment is too heavy or too loud and I'm afraid it will cover the soloist.
Oh, yes. Okay.
Then I'll gesture with my hand to lower the volume. So you adjust things in rehearsals, but you also adjust things on the spot in a live rehearsal.
Does the sound, so when you're in rehearsal, you're in an empty room, but when the show's there, the room's filled with people, can you hear it? Can you hear the difference? Is there a sound difference?
Yeah, there's a sound difference. I mean, it's the same as, I would say, when you move in or out of an apartment, before you put in all your stuff, if you clap, if there's nothing in the room, it's going to be very different than when you put stuff in your room. It absorbs the sound.
Yes, of course. Yeah, the echoes and everything.
Yeah.
Gotcha. So at the end of a performance, is like everyone pretty exhausted? Like I'm kind of curious how it, like how diet and exercise kind of play into the life of a musician who you see just, I know the conductor, you're standing up, but the musicians are sitting down. So there's probably some diet and exercise stuff that people don't realize is important.
There's many articles that have been written, and I think there's a growing interest in performing art medicine, I think it's called.
Okay.
And that think of the musician as an artistic athlete, because it is really tiring. It is an intense exercise of intellectual focus, first of all. But it is also physically exhausting. It requires a lot of endurance. And if you think of it, all of the instruments will have their particularities, but there's a lot of, you're using very small muscles, let's say in the hand, the muscles of the face and the mouth for brass instrument, woodwind instruments. So very subtle muscles, and also a lot of repetitive movements. And a regular concert, an average regular concert is about 80 minutes
that's a lot
of music. So you're doing that for 80 minutes. Do something for 80 minutes that requires your entire focus and a repeated motion. Whatever it is, you're going to be tired at the end of it. And your muscles are going to be tired. And for me, I'm using bigger muscle groups because it's my arm, my upper back, my shoulders, my core also, because to stand, to support everything. And so, it's important to keep in shape because, as a conductor, it's very physical. So it's pretty much like 80 minutes of cardio with my arms. So it is very demanding. It's like an 80-minute workout. So yes, I am tired afterwards. And, when I finish a full week of rehearsals and 3 concerts, like in New Brunswick, I am tired and I do get sore, So...
But you mentioned it's 80 minutes and your arms are going. So, really, you could challenge anyone listening to hold out their arms for 10 minutes and see how you feel. Just holding your arms out for 10 minutes, and now imagine doing it.
Holding still is another challenge because, it's a different type of endurance. But like just moving for 80 minutes, I guess you could do 40 and then take a 20-minute intermission and then do another 40.
Okay.
Yeah.
Break it up a little bit.
Yeah, but yes, it is a challenge.
That's interesting. And another, you mentioned too the intellectual exercise of it, because I think too a lot of people unfamiliar with it, and I would be one of them. Is you just assume, and the musicians, the music's in front of them, so you don't really imagine them doing intellectual exercises. You just imagine them reading and going along with it. But they're obviously in the moment counting, like you just said. Someone might have a bunch of rests off, and they're counting, and they have to be paying attention. So that's a whole nother aspect to it, I find. Or so.
And also, yes, you're reading, but it takes focus to play what you have to play well and with precision, and it requires a lot of attention to constantly be focused on what you do while you keep an ear on what's going on around you. You're constantly adapting. Yeah. So.
Yeah, because it doesn't. Yeah, exactly. Because you're playing as a group, so obviously you're not just doing it for yourself and paying attention to yourself. There's a lot of mental power. Yeah. That's really, I find that interesting. Very cool. And so the season in New Brunswick is about to start. Isn't that correct? The new season.
Yes, that's correct. Our first concert, let me pull up my calendar.
Yeah.
I have so many things going on. Our first concert is on the 25th, 26th, 27th. We're doing one of the same concepts we did last year that was very popular and well received by the audience. It's chart toppers.
Okay.
Where we play 10 of the most popular classical pieces ever written. And we do a countdown from 10 to 1. You know, you would be familiar with that. They do that a lot on radio shows.
Yep.
And Hilary Ladd is hosting.
Oh, I love Hilary Ladd. Yeah.
Yeah.
Great.
So, yeah, we partnered with her last year and it was fantastic. So we invited her back this year. And so, you know, she's walking us through the countdown. So we don't announce ahead of time the order of what we're going to play. We reveal it as we play. So this would be a very good one for someone who wants to discover classical music.
Okay. That was going to be my next question, is like, if suggestions for beginners or someone who wants to kind of like explore it for the first time.
Yeah, well, these are like 10 hits of classical music. At the same time, you know, there's something really interesting about trying something for the first time, because you might have an idea on the classical music world, but at the same time, you can be open to anything because you don't have a comparison, because you don't know what to expect. So I'd say at the same time, all of them are very good. The second program with the Brahms Symphony, it's so majestic and epic and powerful. Like, it's a romantic symphony, so powerful. You know, it's the type of sound, not exactly, because movie music has its own particularity, because it's also very, you know, theatrical in a way, because it's accompanying, it's a complement to the image. But romantic music, classical romantic music, is so powerful. It's the type of sound, you know, you could hear in a movie, soundtrack, in Violin Concerto, and that program, virtuosic, really impressive. So that's also beautiful to see, you know, a soloist just being amazing at what they do. So that's on the second one. And then, you know, on the third one, there's music by a living composer. He wrote in a post-romantic style, so very melodious and harmonious, very rich harmonies, a little bit like Mahler or Wagner, if these names ring a bell. They're romantic and a little bit post-romantic era. And then, you know, we have one of the CBC, what's it called, the list, CBC 30 under 30.
Okay.
Janice Victoria Wang, she's coming to play music from the movie The Hours by Philip Glass.
Okay.
So, you know, there's so much to discover. It's really hard for me to say, you know, come to this one if you want to explore classical music, because I feel every program offers something different that is worth discovering. So, yeah. And
also, I would pitch to anyone listening to go see it in person, because that really changed the way I felt about it. Like, to be in the room. And again, I've gone to shows, all kinds of shows with rock bands and acoustic acts and heavy metal. But when I was in the room with the orchestra, and it was so intense, and so just the sound everywhere and everyone playing in sync all beautifully, that's really what flipped a switch in my brain that made me realize it's I don't want to say best experience live, but it was a great way to shock your system into appreciating it or something like that. Yeah, and I hope you will come again. Absolutely, this season. Let us know. Write us a little word on our Facebook page if you're coming. We'll be happy to know that you're back with us. And I'd be curious to hear also, because if you come to something that's different than what you heard with Beethoven, I'd be curious, because see, we're talking about community and the audience and all of this. Like, I'm really interested in audience feedback and how people live this experience of classical music, because it also informs what I do, you know? So I'm curious about how people, receive it. Yeah, that's interesting. And also, I'll let you know, actually, like when I went, I was a little nervous at first because I thought maybe you should dress up, and I didn't feel comfortable dressing up. So I just decided to go in my hoodie with like a Carl Sagan, a scientist picture. Like I just wanted to kind of be myself.
Yeah.
And I thought that would make me feel uncomfortable, but it really didn't. So I don't know if that is a thing at all, but some people like feel they need to really dress up to go experience it. And I don't know if it's disrespectful not to dress up, but I just wanted to say that because I feel like there's literally people who wouldn't go because they don't want to put on, or they think they have to put on a shirt and tie.
No, they don't have to put on a shirt and tie, you know. Be yourself. What you did is perfect, you know. We dress up on stage. There's like visually it's unified, and it's also wearing black is neutral. You know, so it's like it's, you know, in many jobs you wouldn't have a professional attire. That's just our professional attire, but yeah, no, you can come in jeans with a t-shirt and sneakers. You know, if you like dressing up and you want to dress up for the occasion and make it a full evening and go to fine dining and then a concert, you can do that, or you can just go in jeans and a t-shirt, and that's perfect too.
Yeah.
You know,
yeah. I think it's
about the music.
Maybe it seems silly, but I think it's important to point that out to people because there are, I know personally some friends who they just wouldn't have that they just wouldn't have that attire, and they would just think that's a barrier to entry, even though, I mean, and it did affect me. It did make me question whether I should go or not, but then I just decided to go. So I might.
I'm happy you're bringing it up, and I'm happy that you're sharing your perspective on that aspect of the experience. And I think it's important, and I'm glad we have a chance to let people know that they can be themselves.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because that comes down to community. I mean, you want to be yourself in your community.
Yeah. I'm so glad you took the chance to come, despite the fact that you were a little bit nervous. And I think it's important to talk about this aspect as well, because I think it's evolved a lot. Classical music evolved a lot, and you know, we our dream is to not be perceived, you know, like that, as, you know, an organization for which you have to dress a certain way. And you know, it's a little bit what I said earlier. I want the orchestra and the classical music concert to be welcoming for everyone who wants to partake in that experience. Yeah.
And I think that, it's great to hear that. And I think, I mean, based on how I felt when I got there and enjoyed it, I feel like that is the right mindset to have. That is the right atmosphere that seems to be there. So.
Yeah, so come with your friends next time.
Yeah,
we'll be happy to welcome them.
I'll bring. So just quickly, I know we've been over an hour now, but you're doing a show with. Are you doing a show with a jazz set as well? Are you mixing jazz with symphony? Because that would be a good opportunity, maybe to bring some people into to experience. Are you're conducting that as well, or is that something different?
Yeah, I'm conducting all of the concerts in the season.
Okay.
The one you're talking about is symphonic jazz with Joel Miller.
Joel Miller.
Yeah. A musician from New Brunswick, Juno-nominated saxophonist. And we're going to play a little bit of jazz standards, but mostly his own compositions that he orchestrated for Symphony Orchestra.
Cool.
So it's going to be a really interesting show. I did conduct jazz before, like symphonic jazz, and it's a really fun and powerful experience to have the whole orchestra, you know, swing a little bit. yeah, for sure. Okay, I think that would be a good entry point too for a lot of folks who want to be in the room with it, but just don't know where to start. Yeah, that's in April.
Okay. Very cool. Yeah. Awesome. Well, thanks a lot for coming on, Mélanie. That was really interesting. I learned a ton. I'm really happy and thankful that you took the time to talk to me.
Well, it was a real pleasure. I'm glad you thought about me to be a guest on your show, and I was really happy I got this chance to speak with you and share a bit of my world with you and the audience listening.
I'm sure everyone is going to appreciate it, and there's lots to learn and a whole nother world to explore if people kind of dip their toes in it, I think.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Yeah, you're welcome. See you later.